Shalom and welcome to all my brothers and sisters. I was asked to do a video on Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9 and give an interpretation of how we understand this passage of allegedly the Messiah riding in on a donkey humbly. I'm paraphrasing here. I was asked to basically describe if there's a difference between the Karaite view based on scripture alone on is this speaking about the Messiah? If so, what about Yeshua or Jesus? How does that fit in? Now, the rabbinical sources for this, this is a mixed bag because there's many opinions on this topic, but the consensus of the majority is that they compare it also to, for example, Daniel chapter 7, which is also a huge misunderstanding because a lot of people focus on one coming like the Son of Man on the clouds, and so basically what the rabbinic interpretation is with the consensus in general. I mean, again, there's so many opinions on this, but they basically say, if Israel as a whole or the majority is very, very much repentant and doing the right thing, then the Messiah will come in glory in the clouds of heaven, and if not, he will come lowly on a donkey. And of course, Christians or Messianics will point to this and say, aha, 2,000 years ago, Yeshua, or Jesus, he came already. He came 2,000 years ago. You missed the boat, and the Jews missed their chance. But the reality is, let's be really honest here. The reality is, there are some prophecies that are claimed to be prophecies in the Christian Bible that are not really strong prophecies. If anything, you can't really prove that someone is the Messiah based on someone who rode a donkey. If you look 2,000 years ago, if you were, say, in a time machine, you went back 2,000 years, I'm sure if you asked someone, did you guys see this man riding on a donkey? He's obviously the Messiah. They'd probably look at you like you're nuts. Like, what are you talking about? Lots of people ride on donkeys. Does that mean my grandfather is the Messiah? Am I the Messiah? So many people rode donkeys, obviously. It was not impossible to claim that someone can fulfill this prophecy. Even the Jews, like myself, we're still waiting on the true Messianic age. And, I can ride on a donkey and somebody could say that I am, the Mashiach. It's just, we have to understand the language of Scripture very carefully and understand that, we have these two understandings based on rabbinical interpretation, that if Israel as a whole is doing the right thing, then it's going to be glorious when the Mashiach comes. If not, it will be lowly on a donkey. But the point is, someone can look at that and just say, aha, Israel was sinning, and that's why they crucified Yeshua, Jesus, whatever you want to say. But the problem is, there's so many problems with that, in general. It's just not the case. For example, I want to show you something very interesting. The book of Mark, interestingly, understood the Hebrew in the passage of Zechariah, because he quoted there correctly the fulfillment of Yeshua riding on a donkey, made him riding one. Whereas in the book of Matthew, what's interesting is, if you look at the book of Matthew, and this tells you a lot, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. The book of Mark, it quotes that Yeshua rode on a donkey, and he understood that Zechariah, in the Hebrew, it repeats, he rode on a donkey, or he'll be riding on a donkey, the colt of an ass. It says the same word twice in two different ways. This is how the Hebrew works. It flows and repeats things. But interestingly, Matthew misunderstood this passage, and he incredibly writes the prophecy incorrectly, interpreting it to say that he rode on two animals, a donkey and a colt. So he has this awkward thing where Yeshua, or Jesus, is riding on a donkey and a colt, two animals. He does this awkward Cirque du Soleil act where he's riding on two animals. It's incredible. This is in Matthew 21. Mark chapter 11, is where you find the same story. But again, this is not the reason why I'm mentioning these two passages from Mark 11 and Matthew chapter 21 is not for the reason to say gotcha or to insult anyone who believes in the Christian Bible. That's not the point. The point that I'm trying to make is it shows there something deeper, that the writers of these Gospels were trying to paint Yeshua into their books by making him fulfill certain prophecies. Again, like I said, if you can count how many people in the ancient world rode on donkeys, anybody could have been the Mashiach, if that's your case. Virgin birth, you can't really prove that somebody was born of a virgin. You just believe it on faith. Can you prove that? No. But you see here, the most important thing is that the writers of Matthew and Mark were trying to paint Yeshua into this prophecy. And Matthew mistakenly misinterprets Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9, whereas Mark did not. So it's very obvious that, especially with Matthew, it's very obvious that he purposely was writing Yeshua or Jesus into this prophecy to have him fulfill this prophecy. But he made a mistake, as he makes many mistakes in the book of Matthew. Our interpretation, get back to the point, based on Scripture alone, is basically, to understand this correctly, like Daniel chapter 7 is a whole other subject. I'll get into that in another video. But based on Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9, we accept, based on the authority of Tanakh, throughout Tanakh, that the Mashiach who comes is going to be a man. He's going to be a human being. He's not divine. And every passage that is used to prove that the Messiah is supposed to be divine in some sense is always misinterpreted and misappropriated out of convenience. But when it's clear, please don't believe me. Again, open Isaiah chapter 11 and read verses 2 and 3. It describes the Mashiach in great detail. It says, and he will fear Elohim. And if you're not clear enough, verse 3 says, and he will be filled with the fear of Elohim. Now we know God does not fear anything. He is not God. He is not divine. He's humbleness. It goes on in chapter 11 that he will not judge out of his own initiative, but he will judge according to what Elohim wills. So it's the opposite of what the Christian Bible describes the Messiah as. So we have to read in context. We have to compare with other passages where it's speaking about the Mashiach in general. You can also look at Jeremiah chapter 23, chapter 33 of Jeremiah describes the Mashiach, that when he comes, there will be a time of peace. And this will be because of Elohim, not because of the Messiah. The Messiah is just a human king that will come. So this is just a brief description. It's very apparent when you look throughout Scripture that this Mashiach will simply be the King of the Jews. And he will be someone who will be looked at by all the nations of the world, and they will come to the light of Israel from Elohim. It's really Elohim. Like, for example, Zechariah chapter 14 verse 9. In those days, in that time, Elohim will be one. His name shall be one. It's not about the Mashiach. It's about Elohim alone. He will only be a human ruler. That's what the Mashiach is going to be. Not divine. Again, when you misinterpret Scripture, it's going to get you in trouble every time. So we got to read in context. The Mashiach is only going to be a human king. Humble, just like David, who he is from the line of. If you look at David, you want to see what the Mashiach will be? He will be a continuation of what King David was. Look at the book of Psalms. King David didn't boast about himself and declare himself righteous and pompous. He was humble. He cried out to Yehovah. He gave his heart. The book of Psalms tells you everything about what the Mashiach will be like. Read Psalms chapter 119, all about the Torah. As Isaiah chapter 2 states, the Torah shall go forth from Zion, and all the nations will stream towards Israel, towards Jerusalem, to learn Torah. That's the point. So, we believe that the Mashiach will be a humble descendant of David, who will be a righteous king. But Yehovah, Elohim alone, God alone, will be the ruler over all the earth in that day. Zechariah 14 verse 9. He will be one and his name shall be one. It's not the focus of the Mashiach. It's the focus on Elohim. It's Elohim who's going to do all these things. But we as a people, as Israel, we have to do our part right now, not waiting on some Mashiach. We have to do our part. It says in Scripture, Isaiah chapter 59 verse 20, and the Redeemer shall come to those in Jacob who turn from their transgressions, says Yehovah. He's not going to come to somebody waiting around for the Mashiach. We have to do our part. And though much of Israel is in sin in the land of Israel, there is a righteous remnant who are continuing to keep the covenant as they have throughout the entire history of Israel. And that's who the Mashiach will come to.